It was a Friday afternoon when my girlfriend Kimberly and I decided to head to the beach. The sun was shining and the place was buzzing with life. People were scattered across the sand, laughing and playing in the surf, while music from various radios mingled into a joyous cacophony. Kimberly, with her infectious smile, made friends easily, and soon we were part of a group, laughing, dancing, and enjoying the sun-kissed day. We partied so hard that we didn't realize how quickly time had passed. As the sky darkened and the beachgoers began to disperse, I started getting ready to leave. Kimberly, ever the practical one, pointed out that it was too late to drive back home safely. "Let's rent one of the beach houses for the night," she suggested. "That sounds great, babe," I agreed, grateful for her level-headedness. We made our way to the beach house rental office. The attendant, a grizzled old man with eyes that seemed to pierce through to your soul, handed Kimberly the keys. As we walked towards our temporary abode, a strange feeling washed over me, a sense of foreboding that I couldn't shake. The beach house stood isolated at the far end of the beach, its silhouette stark against the dusky sky. It felt like a place trapped between worlds, holding its breath as if it were alive. On our way to the house, we heard a weird, creepy noise coming from the side. It was a low, mournful wail, like the wind passing through a hollow space, but more sinister. Kimberly grabbed my hand tightly, her nails digging into my skin. "What was that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Driven by a mix of curiosity and dread, I decided to investigate. I walked slowly, each step echoing in the quiet night. As we drew closer, the noise grew louder, more distinct. It sounded almost human, but not quite. Suddenly, we saw it. A figure crouched near the edge of the beach, shrouded in darkness. Its movements were unnatural, jerky, and contorted, as if it were not used to its own body. The figure turned towards us, and for a moment, our eyes met. The creature's face was a ghastly mask of horror, its eyes empty voids that seemed to swallow the light. A twisted grin stretched across its face, revealing rows of sharp, glistening teeth. Kimberly let out a scream, and I felt a cold rush of adrenaline. We turned and ran back to the beach house, fumbling with the key in a desperate attempt to get inside. Once inside, we barricaded the door with whatever we could find. Chairs, a table, anything to create a barrier between us and that thing outside. The noise persisted, now a chorus of wails surrounding the house, pressing in from all sides. We huddled together in the center of the room, hearts pounding, breaths shallow. The night seemed endless, the oppressive atmosphere weighing heavily on us. Every creak of the house, every whisper of wind, made us jump. We knew we weren't alone. The creature was out there, waiting. Somehow we managed to stay awake, keeping a vigil against the encroaching terror. As the first light of dawn crept through the windows, the noises ceased. The oppressive feeling lifted, replaced by an exhausted relief. We waited a little longer, making sure it was safe. Then, gathering our things, we made a dash for the car, not daring to look back at the house that had nearly claimed us. Thank God Kimberly and I made it out. We never spoke of that night again, but the memory of those hollow eyes and twisted grin haunted us for years. We promised each other we would never return to that cursed beach, a vow we intended to keep for the rest of our lives. So about a year ago, I bought this small beach house in Miami. I had saved up for years, and finally I had my own little slice of paradise. The first night I was excited and a bit nervous. It was a Friday evening and the sun was setting, casting an orange glow over everything. The house was in a quiet area, away from the main hustle and bustle of Miami. I spent the early evening unpacking and getting settled. I made a simple dinner, opened a bottle of wine, and sat on the porch, watching the sunset. Everything seemed perfect. Around 10 p.m., I decided to call it a night. I locked all the doors and windows and headed to bed. At about midnight, I woke up to the sound of what I thought was a car door slamming. I brushed it off, thinking it was just someone nearby. I tried to go back to sleep, but then I heard it again. This time, It was followed by the sound of footsteps on the gravel path outside my house. My heart started racing. I lay there trying to convince myself that it was just my imagination. After a few minutes of silence, I finally started to relax. Just as I was about to drift back to sleep, I heard the unmistakable sound of someone trying to open the back door. The doorknob rattled, and then there was a loud bang, as if someone had thrown their body against the door. I jumped out of bed and grabbed the closest thing I could find, which was a heavy lamp from the bedside table. I slowly made my way to the back of the house, my heart pounding in my chest. I could see a shadow moving outside the window, and then another loud bang on the door. I knew I had to do something. I dialed 911 and whispered to the operator what was happening. They told me to stay on the line and find a safe place to hide. I crouched behind the kitchen counter, trying to stay as quiet as possible. The banging on the door continued, each time more forceful than the last. I could hear the operator on the other end of the line, telling me that the police were on their way. It felt like hours, but it was probably only a few minutes. Suddenly, the banging stopped. I held my breath, straining to hear any sound. I heard footsteps moving around the side of the house, and then, to my horror, the sound of glass breaking. They were trying to get in through the window. I gripped the lamp tighter, ready to defend myself if I had to. Just when I thought they were going to get in, I heard the sound of sirens in the distance. The footsteps stopped, and everything went quiet. I stayed hidden, listening intently. The sirens grew louder, and then I heard voices outside. The police had arrived. I slowly got up and peeked out the window. There were 2 police officers outside, their flashlights shining around the yard. I went to the front door and let them in, my hands still shaking. They searched the house and the surrounding area but didn't find anyone. It looked like whoever it was had taken off when they heard the sirens. The police stayed with me until I felt safe again. They advised me to install a security system and gave me some tips on how to secure the house better. That night, I barely slept. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. Over the next few days, I followed the police's advice. I installed security cameras and reinforced the doors and windows. I even got a dog for extra security. It took a while for me to feel safe in my own home again. Looking back, I'm just grateful that nothing worse happened. It's scary to think about how quickly things can change. One moment, I was living my dream, and the next I was fighting to defend myself in my own home. I had to be strong to defend myself, and I'm glad I did. Now I'm more cautious, and I always make sure to take extra precautions to stay safe. So my parents had recently bought this beautiful beach house in Florida. They'd always wanted a place by the ocean, and finally, they had their dream home. It was a nice and comfy place with big windows overlooking the beach, a cozy porch, and a yard with palm trees swaying in the breeze. Everything seemed perfect. I was super excited to visit them for the summer break. It had been a while since I last saw them, and I was looking forward to some quality time. They had also hired 2 men to take care of the house and yard. I thought it was great because my parents could relax and enjoy their retirement without worrying about maintenance. When I arrived, my parents greeted me warmly. The house was everything I imagined and more. It felt welcoming, with a light ocean breeze flowing through the open windows and the sound of waves crashing in the background. My mom had prepared a big dinner, and we sat on the porch, catching up and enjoying the view. Later that evening, I noticed the 2 caretakers, Jim and Dave. They were outside working on the yard. My parents introduced me to them, and they seemed nice enough at first. Jim was a big guy with a friendly smile, and Dave was quieter, but he seemed okay too. My parents told me they were very reliable and had been working for them for a few months now. After dinner, I decided to take a walk on the beach. The night was calm, and the moonlight reflected off the water, creating a peaceful atmosphere. When I got back to the house, I felt a bit uneasy. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something felt off. I brushed it off as just being tired from the trip and went to bed. In the middle of the night, I woke up to a faint noise. It sounded like whispering, but I couldn't be sure. I sat up in bed and listened carefully. The whispering stopped, and everything was quiet again. I thought I was just imagining things, so I tried to go back to sleep. The next morning, I mentioned it to my parents, and they said it was probably just the sound of the waves or the wind. I decided not to worry about it and spent the day relaxing and enjoying the beach. Jim and Dave were around, doing their usual work, and everything seemed normal. That night, things took a turn for the worse. I woke up again, but this time the noises were louder. I could hear footsteps and hushed voices coming from outside my window. My heart started racing, and I got out of bed to check. I peeked through the blinds and saw Jim and Dave standing in the yard, talking and looking around suspiciously. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but something about their behavior seemed really strange. I decided to stay up and keep an eye on things. Around 2 a.m., I heard the back door creak open. I quietly got up and tiptoed to the hallway. From there, I saw Jim sneaking into the house holding a small flashlight. He was being very careful not to make any noise. I knew something was very wrong. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering to the operator what was happening. They told me to stay calm and stay on the line. Meanwhile, I watched as Jim rummaged through the living room, looking for something. Dave was still outside, keeping watch. I had to do something to protect my parents. I slowly made my way to my parents' room and woke them up. I told them what was happening, and they looked shocked. My dad wanted to confront Jim, but I convinced him to wait for the police. It felt like an eternity, but finally, I heard the sound of sirens approaching. Jim must have heard them too, because he quickly turned off his flashlight and tried to sneak out. But it was too late. The police arrived just in time and caught him trying to leave the house. They also found Dave in the yard, who tried to run but was quickly apprehended. The police searched them and found out that they had been planning to rob the house. They had tools and other items that indicated they were going to break into the house and steal valuables. It was terrifying to think about what could have happened if I hadn't woken up and called the police. After that night, my parents fired Jim and Dave immediately. The police took them away and we were left to process what had happened. It was hard to believe that these two men, who seemed so nice and trustworthy, were actually planning to rob my parents. We were all shaken by the experience, but we were also grateful that nothing worse happened. I stayed with my parents for a while longer to make sure they were okay and helped them install a new security system. We took extra precautions to ensure something like this would never happen again. Looking back, it was a really scary experience, but it taught us to be more cautious about who we trust. I had to make sure my parents were safe from those criminals, and I'm glad I was there to protect them. Now we're all more careful and we've moved on from that terrifying night.